I'm Rosie. I'm a social researcher and I work for New Philanthropy Capital. So we're a think tank and consultancy for the charity sector, whose missions is to help organisations in the sector be as effective as they can. And I focus on the ways that charities and funders can use data to inform and improve their work. So my aim in this session is to suggest what we think are sensible ways that we can use data to inform and assess and improve our services and campaigns. And I'm proposing a way to think through the role of the theory of change and move from that into decisions about what data is most useful to collect. So I'll take you through how we're approaching theory of change nowadays and how we're using that to develop data collection plans, thinking in terms of 5 types of data to answer 5 types of questions that charities are asking about their work. In terms of format, I'm sharing quite a bit. So I'll talk for 20 minutes and then there'll hopefully be 20 minutes time for discussion. And there it'd be really, really good to hear from you on what you found has helped you to prioritize your data collection, and we can share tips as well as challenges. And I'll be checking in the chat as we go for questions popping up while I speak. And I'll answer short, quick, clarificatory things as I go and leave bigger stuff to the end. So please do, continue to post in the chat. Hi, Martin. Hi, Rachel. Tell us who you are. Are you familiar? Have I been lost? Can you hear me okay? Okay, you can hear. Brilliant. Good. I can not see you, not hear you, but it's very reassuring having that chat. Thank you. So tell us who you are and how familiar you are with theory of change, and whether at the moment, are you at the moment using data to help plan and evaluate you or others' work? And how are you feeling about the task of prioritizing what to collect? Confident, cautious, distressed? Tell us in the chat. So the conundrum for us, as we see it, is that, social sector and other organizations have got difficult choices about where to invest limited resource. And I'll start, if you don't mind, sharing some slides now so that I can talk and you can look at pictures which are attractive-ish. Bit wordy. There we go. And I'll just move us up. Everyone happy with that? Can you all see? Brilliant. Thank you, Claire. So this conundrum about what data do we choose to collect? We've got loads of conflicting priorities, different stakeholders who want different information from us. We've also got important questions ourselves that we want answers to. But I don't know whether you guys are all as data hungry as some people, but how do you choose between those things? Many competing priorities. So what we tried 8 years ago was a publication called 4 Pillars. It was general guidance for a sort of a process, like here's a process that you can go through to help answer these questions. And we would suggest, do start with a meaningful theory of change process, do then move on to prioritizing the questions you need to answer, then thinking about kind of what standard of evidence is appropriate in that context, possible for you, then into selecting sources of evidence. And of course, none of that is happening without the foundation of real leadership, of a learning culture, of good systems and processes, small things. And this was popular, but it left a lot of unanswered questions, particularly around Pillar 2, that prioritizing the questions you need to answer and the evidence you need to collect. So we've been thinking more about that and have tried to develop a more systematic approach to considering the options and thinking about where priorities are. So I'm going to focus on those steps 1 and 2 today. So first of all, that first pillar, the theory of change. So we did a publication that we've been kind of testing in practice a lot with different organizations called 10 Steps. And this was thinking about theories of change for services primarily, for campaigns, but also for sort of smaller organizations. It's a good foundation for all thinking about TOC. Although, for systems focused work and for more complex bigger organizations, you may be thinking about sort of several different theories of change for different aspects of work. But we see a real value of theory of change in being the thinking work that's done in developing this, and the internal and external sort of research and discussions that happen through that process to build the underlying thinking and to test it. So that should lay the foundation for planning and evaluative work. Putting your thinking out there, how you're expecting things to work, what you hope it'll achieve, having to consider the situation, the assumptions underpinning your plans. So and I would encourage you to sort of check out the guidance for more sort of didactic stuff, and I'm going to try and sort of whistle you through to get to how this interacts with that question around, so what does this mean for the data I collect and how am I using this? So briefly then, these steps: situation analysis, what is the issue you're hoping to tackle and what does your organization offer? And I'll come back to that because there are data questions for it. The next bit being your target groups, who are the people who you can help or influence the most? And then your next step almost sort of works backwards in how you'd look at a theory of change. You're starting with impact. So what is the change, the sort of sustained and long-term change that we want to see? We've discussed the situation. We know who we want to work with, and what are we trying to help them achieve? And from that, what are the sort of shorter term changes, the outcomes for that target group that might contribute to that goal? And from that then, so what activities are needed? What are we going to do? And that's the idea of kind of working from the situation that you see, that you were agreed upon, to who you're working with on that, to the impact that you will want to achieve, and then backwards into what does that mean for our planning. And then step 6 is what we call change mechanisms linked to quality, which has sort of sometimes been a missing step. Certainly on our part, it has been, and we've been influenced by realist evaluation here in asking more clearly, how are people experiencing your service? What are they feeling, thinking, doing? Kind of what's it ideally sparking for them? It's the kind of how is this person interacting with this activity? Where's the active ingredient that may support change for them? And that's an area we found really useful in evolving our approach. And it links directly to quality. So what will be happening if this service is being delivered well? What will we be sort of seeing? And then sequencing. So in more sort of complex situations or longer run things, often the case. And, in what we're not trying to be too prescriptive or linear, but sometimes there's ordering around what we might see first and what we might expect to see earlier on and at a later stage, to be realistic about what we can expect is going to happen. And then stakeholders and enabling factors. So sort of what around us are the kind of things which could amplify or inhibit the achievement of this. And then finally, assumptions. So what are the sort of series of assumptions we're making in this? And can we sort of hold it up to scrutiny ourselves and work through what is our underlying thinking, and can we kind of test that out? So things to highlight really here are like the importance of situation analysis, which I'll talk about in a sec. The importance of mechanisms, really thinking what are the kind of the active ingredients that we're sort of looking for in terms of people's experience and what's happening for them through this, and what are our underlying assumptions. And hopefully that should help you kind of with the people you're working with, the community or sort of user group, potential user group, the staff, the stakeholders, the evidence you're drawing upon, to get a kind of agreed picture which has surfaced your assumptions about what you want to deliver, and how you want the target groups to benefit, how they want to benefit. Ideally, they're involved. You're doing this as a sort of collective piece of work. And in terms of data, the theory of change should be helping to narrow your focus from potentially measuring anything towards a clearer list of what's relevant. Are you all with me? So then the next part, let's just look at the role of data, the role of evidence here. So you've got two sides in a way. You've got looking back, what evidence, data, intelligence is informing our plans, and then you've got looking forward. What do we need information-wise to assess whether and how we're achieving what we set out to, answering some of the key questions about our work, being able to refine our assumptions. And evidence, I use the term sort of carefully because we often have quite narrow associations with a high bar, published studies, a trial before court, delightful term. But I want to think more broadly about sort of different forms of intelligence, different kinds of data, and the information you get through conversations with others. All of this is types of evidence that we want to be drawing upon in our looking backwards in our situation analysis. And then, so those two sides. So on the situation analysis, just to reiterate, I suppose, this is your sort of diagnosis of the situation and of the opportunity. Problem, you can use the term problem. Some people are finding that it's less useful than kind of opportunity or what's possible. Just depends what's most useful for framing the conversation. But you're using discussion, background data, your information, existing research, as much as you can draw upon that, take full advantage, and using evidence to both justify and to challenge the assumptions that you're making at each stage in your theory of change. So how do we know that these activities may lead to these outcomes, or that these activities will land within a certain context? And looking for evidence that both supports and might challenge that helps us to reach sort of positions and assumptions about what we think we can say at this stage and where the most open questions are. So now you've got to decide what data to collect going forward. And we would break this down into a few types of data for charities to collect from and with the people using their services or part of the campaign, to support performance management, sort of decisions as you go, evaluation as you go. And so we've got 5 types laid out, as I say, but in practice, I rather think it's going to be a bit less. So we start with user data, and this is what relates to in the TOC, the information about your target group. So this is what you're collecting from people at the start. And that can be divided into sort of the more observable factors, or those that people self-report: age, gender, ethnicity, if it's education, attendance, attainment, that stuff. And then the more subjective factors around where they're at. So their hopes or fears, as relevant in that context, self-esteem. And this can help with 3 things. So, this is something that will allow you to check that we're reaching the people that we can help the most. It's a sort of a first measure of success or for course correction. There's always a risk of just delivering to the low-hanging fruit. We need to continuously check and challenge ourselves about who we're reaching. And it feels basic, but it's so fundamental, isn't it? And I guess we sort of state the importance of it so that no one forgets that, and we see this as a critical part of insight and of management. But it also enhances analysis. So, good data allows you on users, allows you to identify any variations in how different people are engaging with services, to compare demographics, feedback, other factors. And then it helps us to assess and understand changing need as well. So, frontline organizations are pretty uniquely placed, vis-a-vis government and others to collect like timely on the ground information. And when that's measured over time, it can be really powerful. And it can also, contribute to policy change. Working with lots of charities like school home support and others, the kind of data that they're getting, that the intelligence, if you like, of sort of the most severe problems for parents, around debt, poor housing, they're seeing that, they're able to speak to it, they're able to use that in advocacy. But of course, with this area, as has been being discussed over the past couple of days, there are 2 opposing challenges, really. That there are many, many relevant questions that we could be asking, but collecting data about people is time consuming, and these questions are often intrusive. The framing of them is really, really important. And especially at an early stage where someone may be establishing a relationship with an organization. At worst, the process of collecting all of this stuff puts people off coming back. There can be judgments inferred. So we need to know our group, we need to know our people, we need to consider what's fair, consider what's proportionate, if there's anything in it for them, and finding the right balance in that. And therefore, as in all of this, the sort of co-creation of strategies for this is really important in working with people. In terms of that user data, though, statutory agencies often have data that they could share, and it's often hard to get from them, but it's worth exploring and worth asking the question. So then on to the next type, which is engagement data. So this is how people use services, and this links to the theory of change activities that you're delivering. So the traditional term, I guess, is outputs, where you say, we've delivered this number of sessions, but we prefer engagement because we switch the focus to the person and to how they're interacting, and can sort of look at more nuances around that, follow people as individuals if we've got the ability to connect. So like user data, it could be more objective or observable sort of frequency, timing, duration of engagement, and then more subjectively the quality of engagement, if people are listening, taking part, just present. And this is really easy to collect. Of course, the subjective part involves some observation and judgment for people delivering, if that's how you do it. But and it doesn't have to be totally robust, but it's good for clues. And totally critical to understanding, how something's working and if it's proceeding as planned. It's a big assumption around engagement that we have. So then the next type is feedback data, what people think about the services. And this links to the mechanisms that I talked about, those change mechanisms and quality. And feedback data is partly about testing whether the service is experienced in the way we intend, which should be clear in the theory of change. You've laid that out. So in a mentoring project, for example, things like feeling comfortable, a sense of trust, feeling listened to, and so on. But feedback is also fundamentally about giving people a voice, a way for them to tell us what they think in their own terms. And that's how you get the best information on how to improve. And we divide the collection of that kind of data into more formal approaches, the surveys, questionnaires, qualitative research, and the more informal approaches, the suggestion boxes, user forums, many channels, spontaneous conversations, and getting those sort of documented and happening systematically. And people will ideally feel encouraged to give feedback, across different channels and have the opportunity to do that. And as above, there are the concerns around overburdening people with this. That's a challenge. So the feedback loop is really important. Not to be to them and us, but you said we did, that there's some sort of kind of value and reciprocity in that kind of feedback relationship. That all of this data is collected sort of within a relationship, and it's seen in that way, that we sort of are always looking at how can this not be extractive, how can this create shared value. So these things should need to be worked through with people. But a real challenge in feedback that I would also mention is just in making it representative, right? Because to get really useful feedback, we need to go beyond our immediate service users and talk to people who haven't engaged, but we might have hoped would, people who've dropped out, and it's an effort to get to them, but that's really important to understand. It's often the most positive and negative who speak up. And so sort of one of the, I guess, is sort of just distinction between just sort of the open feedback and then making it more of a sort of systematic evaluative processes in designing a system which works to get the views of people who wouldn't normally volunteer to be consulted, making an extra effort to connect. And you've got the outcomes data, sorry. And the final two types, right, the outcomes and impact, I was just flipping around with there, are the ones that give people the real headaches. These are where the sort of two challenges of collection and attribution really start mattering. And I would say, I would describe outcomes as the shorter term changes people gain from a service, and to think about that in terms of, knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, sort of retained a short time after. Or to think of outcomes in sequence, if there's more things happening. And they're obviously important. They're the first indication that you're making a difference for people. It's always appealing to measure them, but they are difficult to measure because, and I'm sure this is all bread and butter to you guys. But if it's helpful to lay it out in this way, and from our perspective, they're difficult because they relate to changes in people that are sometimes internal, like a new way of thinking, or unseen, like new behaviors or social groups. And we have to rely on people to report their outcomes to us. And they may not want to tell us, or they may be unreliable witnesses in terms of wanting to say the polite or right thing, or not feeling in a position to say. So you've got solutions to that with formal validated tools, with sort of recoding outcomes, small-scale qualitative approaches, but it's rarely easy, and there's a question about whether it's always necessary to measure outcomes, which I'll come back to in a moment. Then impact data, so by this I mean the long-term difference of services. To be more precise about how we use that term, you could suggest there are three qualities and conditions. One, I mean, we're talking about positive impact, meaningful and important impact, something commissioners are willing to pay for, or that that is a big substantive change. It's sustained, so the lasting effect, after a service is ended, and that it's achieved by people themselves. We don't make people healthy or educate them. It's contributing capacities and resources for people to achieve those changes, that impact in their lives. And of course, this is highly desirable, and is, these well-rehearsed discussions now around what, the limitations of this being seen as a holy grail. And of course, people want to understand the difference they've made and want to tell people about it. But when we're thinking about charities' work and the context that they're working in, impact measurement for the most sort of rigorous evidence and learning, there's rarely an opportunity to do it. We can't will that data to happen. It's nearly always the hardest type of data to collect. Why? Because for sustained change, we need to get to people after the work is done. Even if we can get that data, we've got the problem of attribution. How do we know if our services have made any difference? To test that formally, you need the counterfactual or control group. Sometimes there's an opportunity for that. Many times there's not. Then to measure impact, doing research on a large enough scale to be confident in the results if you're not doing something qualitative. So in practice, that means, as far as we're concerned, formal impact measurement isn't feasible for most organizations when you're talking about that type of evidence. There are exceptions with government data where there are sort of admin data sets available, which is great, but there are lots of situations where it's not possible. But there is an existing evidence base that could be taken advantage of, where there's a good body of evidence around exercise and physical health, or parental engagement and attainment, where you can sort of link your work with outcomes and impact which are already well established, make that connection to the evidence base to justify the approach you're taking. So those are the types. Now, how to prioritize between them. And I've alluded to this a bit, but there are, for each type of data, it should be helping to answer some key questions. And these are some examples of those that you want to be monitoring to deliver well and improve. And what we'd say is, it should be routine to be measuring and taking user and engagement and feedback data, that these are sort of crucial and quite simple, but you can do a lot with. You're picking up early warning signs, you're knowing who you're working with, you're understanding their experience, you're able to look at how well things are being delivered, you can make changes on the ground, you can learn and improve with those you're working with. Occasionally collecting outcomes data with a sample to test whether what you're thinking is happening. As a situation changes, those you're working with may change. Is this right in the context? In exceptional cases, formal impact assessment. And given the sort of challenges and costs involved in collecting outcomes and impact data, we're always asking organizations whether they need to do it. So the things that we haven't included in here, and you may be thinking this is missing, outputs and quality data, which are sort of looking at your processes and what you deliver, which we acknowledge are important, but consider them sort of separately because they're collected internally rather than from the people you're working with. And outputs, useful in looking at the likely scale of what you've done, being able to tell people sort of how much you've delivered, sort of gives a simple view of that. Quality involves judgments about how good your work is based on information from the service delivery. So checking that you're sort of meeting your own standards and aims. So an example would be this breakfast club, where you can see the types of information that they're getting on each type of data, and how they've been able to access data on attendance and attainment that already exists within the school settings. It's just a case of accessing it, but they're able to get who's there, who who they're engaging, how that's working, if things are ticking over, what they're learning, and able to make sort of continual sort of changes and tweaks as they go. A couple of other points on deriving good questions. These are just some research methods examples. I've covered the sort of distinction between the informal and the formal. So in the interest of time, I'm going to dash over that. And amazingly, we've all got all of this stuff to look through again if we want to. But yeah, 2 more points on deriving good questions. One is using your assumptions in the theory of change to identify your research questions. So here with the School Breakfast Club, it's as well as those core questions we've just gone through, what assumptions have they made in designing their service? Like, are they holding? Is the model so far sort of sound on the ground? Are the parents kind of giving the kids breakfast and the kids aren't hungry, and etc. etc. Then thinking about the decisions you're going to need to make. So, with this breakfast club, if they're engaging the right children, if they're regularly brought, are there gaps in who they're working with, how to respond to that, feedback on perceptions, are there barriers to engagement, are they going to continue to run, there are lots of questions, decisions that they need to make that data will help to inform. So to end, I'll just come back there. By and large, it's our view that service and sort of campaigning organisations want to use data to assess and improve what they're doing, but we're not often in a position to rigorously assess impact and attribute change to our work. But it is within our reach to use theory of change to ask good questions, to prioritise data that can tell us a lot about our work and support decisions on what to do next. So that's the talk. Now let's come to Q&A. So, okay, distinctions for outcomes and impact about being attributable. I'd agree that, yes, okay, so that's just, we would agree that impact is about being attributable, and that's one of the reasons that methodologically it's so hard to do. Yes, but I guess we're making further distinctions with outcomes being with further specifications around what impact is. Those 3 points I made. Getting past the self-selecting nature of clients, Claire. Yeah, I mean it's the work on recontacting and sort of testing if the issue is getting people to participate in the evaluation. It's understanding what the barriers are to it, and when it's most easy to reach people. Yes, I mean that's the reason that getting to longer term impacts is difficult. It's maintaining enough of a connection to be able to recontact, and part of why and people have good reason for not necessarily being available. So it's one of the reasons that we're so hesitant about going for impact evaluation in lots of settings. But there's also, I mean, incentivizing. I think in the charity sector there seems to be sort of less use of incentives, financial incentives than in government research and evaluation, and appreciating people's time, and remunerating that is sort of one of the ways. Looking at modes and making it as easy as possible, as frictionless to re-engage. Yes, Ali, that's a real chestnut at this time, and we've been talking to Tamsin at National Lottery about this. It's very much on our minds. COVID has so significantly disrupted And we've, in some of our evaluations, moved from a much more sort of planned out methodology to a developmental evaluation methodology. And we've done that in several cases because we've just had to start again and drop quite a lot of the assumptions and use much sort of closer to the ground iterative methodologies to rescope where we are and to be more nimble in the evaluative work. And people have been okay with that and understood. So that's what we've done. Getting in touch with people who don't normally give feedback. Yeah, I mean, here, I think working kind of with the group of people that who you're delivering the service to this is why the sort of co-creation of sort of research and evaluation is partly why it's so vital to make it work, because people, so it's, you know, parents and children with English as an additional language, you know, it may be that that people kind of, some of your service users can suggest what might work, and whether that's kind of working with staff of yours or with volunteers who can help you with the evaluation, who will speak the language, who'll be able to engage with them more easily, whether it's sort of support with alternatively with, you know, additional language questionnaires, or I wouldn't have an instant answer to that, but I would say that you find it by working with that community, and evaluation, you know, can sometimes feel like it's being done to people, and it should be, you know, it should be the opposite wherever possible. But yeah, the ways to, so it's sort of how do you make people feel able to give feedback? How do you make them feel comfortable? And, you know, that is then a question where other people will have knowledge that they can share with you about how to make them sort of comfortable and able. How do you get those who don't connect? Yeah, so it's another one. I think you've got your target group sort of profile, and you look at the information on who's working with you and who's not, and say, right, who are we missing, and who have we not been able to reach? And you may have kind of contact information for other people depending on the nature of your work, and be able to reach people that way, to call people who may have expected to engage and then didn't, or who you've been in contact and who have dropped off. So you're able to recontact. You can use, you know, surveys where there's financial incentive. You can use sort of sessions, invite people to sessions, sort of re-engaging with a wider community to say, we want to know what it is that we're not doing, how we might improve what we're doing, and sort of invite a kind of more open, sort of constructive conversation around it. And there's no one system, I suppose. And who I would recommend looking at on feedback specifically, there are loads of interesting examples with feedback labs in the US, and their use of feedback has been really evolving, and have got lots of examples of the way that feedback is being used in different organizations. Just to check on the chat. So we've got a mix of, yeah, sorry, you've got formal Q&A and then chat, just getting used to this forum. Oh, I'm glad that that's useful. So please, I'm just running through again. Okay, I think people do add more questions if you've got them. And I'm really keen to hear your experience, whether these are things that you've already been doing. I mean, it was sort of our hunch that we were making it sound simple by giving types, but actually this is often what people are doing in practice, and we had sort of been doing ourselves without realizing for quite a while. So I hope this all just feels very familiar, but a little bit more doable than it can sometimes feel with evaluation. And they're appearing at the top. Okay, here we go. Yeah. So Richard has asked, have you looked at the use of self-signified micro narratives, getting people to tell you stories and then asking them to score those stories against neutral scales? I did not within the charity sector, but in what I was specializing in qualitative research for lots of years before moving into the charity sector, and we were using narrative approaches. But this is an interesting example of scoring against neutral scales. Richard, it would be brilliant if you could share an example of having done that yourself, and we can share that with the group. That would be great to see. I mean, the other point, sorry, that I would make, because quite a few of you have been talking about that difficulty of reaching people or of getting them to come back to you, and I'm sure you're doing this, but just to reiterate the importance of the value of sampling, you know, and really asking the minimum number of people needed, you know, doing really rigorous sampling, a smaller sample, and working harder to get a higher response rate, you know. So not going out to everyone, you know, even if it's too hard, you know, statistical significance is less important than getting a good response rate on the sample that you've created. So sort of really working hard on driving that. Okay. I think we've just got a few minutes left now. So if there are any other, oh, thank you, Richard. So Dave Snowden, the Sensemaker app. Aha, Sensemaker. Yes, and we came across this with Girl Hub in working in several different contexts, East Africa and a few other countries that had a Sensemaker approach, which is worth looking up. I expect that the app was part of that, and they were using that in quite rural settings with young girls. It was focused on young girls and women and moving towards greater independence. And it was really clever ways of doing community group feedback and different ways of using qualitative to get criteria and to rate those. Great, now free for NFPs. Excellent. Yeah, that was one of those ones I would worked with Girl Hub a bit on their evaluation approaches, but that was quite a lot of years ago, and it's looking at what's happened since and how that's been picked up, and I'm sure it's evolved a lot over recent years. So thank you all very much for coming along, and I hope that I've answered most of the questions as best I can in the time, and really keen to hear what you guys make of this, whether it's useful. So please do speak to me sort of over the conference or another time. At NPC, always interested in talking to people about how they're getting useful, meaningful data from the work they're doing. So thanks all, and I hope you have a brilliant rest of the conference.